Imagine living a life where you no longer fear the parts of yourself you've kept hidden, where your greatest strengths are born from embracing the very darkness you've tried to avoid. What if I told you that unlocking your true potential starts with confronting the shadowy corners of your psyche? Carl Jung believed that within these hidden realms lies the key to wholeness, the path to becoming the person you're truly meant to be. In a world that constantly pressures us to fit into predefined molds, the most liberating thing you can do is discover the freedom of being your authentic self. Today, we dive deep into Jung's powerful concept of shadow work, exploring how embracing the darkness can ultimately reveal the truth about who you really are and set you free. You've spent your entire life crafting a version of yourself you can show to the world, a polished identity, your name, your achievements, your likes and dislikes. You believe that's who you are. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who reshaped modern psychology, would tell you that's just the surface. Beneath your conscious identity lies a deeper, more mysterious part of you. It's not evil, it's not broken, but it is hidden, and it holds the truth about who you really are. This hidden self is what Jung called the shadow. It's the part of the psyche that holds everything you repress, deny, or ignore. Thoughts you're ashamed of, desires you pretend not to have, impulses that don't fit with the version of yourself you show to others, or even admit to yourself. It's not just the dark or ugly stuff, it's also your unlived potential, the dreams you abandoned to fit in. And here's the disturbing truth. This hidden part of you might be running your life without your awareness. Think about it. How many times have you reacted in a way that shocked even you? Maybe you lashed out at someone and didn't know why. Maybe you sabotaged a relationship, even though you thought you wanted it to work. These aren't just random mistakes. Jung would say this is the shadow taking control, because what you don't make conscious controls you from the dark. We're trained to avoid discomfort, to shove anything unpleasant into the back closet of our minds and pretend it doesn't exist. Society rewards us for doing this. Be polite, be normal, be successful. But all the while your psyche is keeping score. Every unexpressed anger, every suppressed desire, every fear you push away, none of it disappears. It becomes part of the shadow, and unless you confront it, it festers. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is not optional. It is necessary for becoming whole. This confrontation isn't about fighting the darkness. It's about understanding it. Jung didn't believe in erasing or defeating the shadow. He believed in integrating it, bringing it into consciousness so you can reclaim the power it holds. Because the shadow isn't just a container for your worst traits. It's also where your creativity lives, your passion, your authenticity. It's the key to becoming not just a good version of yourself, but a real one. You see, the person you think you are, the ego, is limited. It's fragile. It clings to control and fears the unknown. But the psyche is vast, and the shadow is its uncharted territory. When you deny the shadow, you deny your full humanity. When you embrace it, you tap into something deeper than identity. You start to live from a place of wholeness, not performance. But here's the kicker. You won't see the shadow in yourself easily. It hides behind your righteousness, your certainty, your triggers, the things that annoy you in others. Those are usually reflections of your own denied traits. The more something repulses you, the more likely it is that it's pointing toward an unconscious part of yourself. That's the paradox of the shadow. It's easier to see in others than in ourselves. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This isn't just philosophy, it's a call to action. If you don't explore your inner darkness, life will keep pushing you into situations that force you to. conflicts, crises, breakdowns, they're often invitations to look deeper, to ask, what part of myself have I ignored? What truth have I buried? The journey inward isn't comfortable. It's not meant to be. It requires radical honesty. It demands that you dismantle the false self, the identity you've clung to for validation, success, or safety. It invites you to meet the parts of yourself you'd rather pretend don't exist. But in that meeting, something extraordinary happens. You stop running, you stop projecting, you stop pretending, and for the first time, you get a glimpse of who you really are. The truth is, there's nothing more powerful than a person who has made peace with their shadow. They don't seek approval. They embody presence. They don't fear judgment. They understand complexity. They don't fake strength. They cultivate inner resilience. When you stop hiding from the shadow, you start leading from your soul. Carl Jung didn't promise that shadow work would be easy, but he knew it was essential, not just for personal healing, but for collective evolution. Because as long as individuals deny their darkness, societies will keep projecting it into wars, into hate, into systems of oppression. But when one person chooses to meet their inner shadow with courage, they light a path for others to do the same. So the question isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. The question is, are you brave enough to look at it? Carl Jung believed that to understand yourself truly and completely, you must look into the darkness, not just the world's darkness, but your own. The shadow is not some abstract concept. It's a living, breathing part of your psyche. It's formed from everything you've disowned, rejected, or buried deep within. And yet, it's not your enemy. It's your greatest teacher, because in confronting the shadow, you don't just discover what's wrong with you, you discover what's missing. Jung described the shadow as the dark side of the psyche, not because it's evil, but because it's unconscious. It lives in the blind spots of your awareness. It's what you don't want to see about yourself. If you've ever judged someone harshly, only to later realize you were projecting your own flaws onto them, you've glimpsed your shadow. Projection is the shadow's favorite trick. It allows you to see in others what you refuse to accept in yourself. The shadow is not always sinister. It can be irrational, chaotic, childish, or even creative. Jung emphasized that the shadow contains not just personal elements, but also collective ones, archetypes shared by all of humanity. It's where ancient fears and instincts live. It's primal, emotional, and raw. And the more you try to suppress it, the more power it gains. What you resist persists. What you deny becomes destiny. Most people are terrified of their shadow. Society teaches us to be good, polite, and acceptable. From childhood, we learn that certain emotions are bad. Anger, jealousy, desire, pride. We hide those emotions away to be accepted. But the psyche doesn't forget. The shadow grows in silence, waiting to be seen. And if you ignore it long enough, it finds a way to force itself into your life through anxiety, depression, addiction, or self-sabotage. Jung didn't believe in fixing the shadow. He believed in integrating it. To integrate is to make it conscious, to shine a light into the dark. This isn't about moral judgment, it's about wholeness. Because without the shadow, you're only living half a life. You're fragmented, split, incomplete. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the path. That's the work. And it's not easy. Shadow work requires radical honesty. It demands you question your motives, your fears, your automatic reactions. It means asking yourself uncomfortable questions. Why did that comment trigger me? Why do I hate that person so much? Why do I keep repeating the same destructive patterns? The answers are not found in logic, but in feeling, in allowing yourself to explore the raw, unfiltered truth of your inner world. When you begin to recognize your shadow, you begin to reclaim lost parts of yourself. That buried anger, it might hold the key to your personal power. That jealousy, it could be pointing to your deepest, unfulfilled desires. That guilt, maybe it's asking you to set boundaries. The shadow doesn't just hold the things you fear, it also holds your potential, the parts of you that were too bold, too wild, too real for the world to accept. To do shadow work is to become more human, more compassionate, because when you understand your own darkness, you stop projecting it onto others. You begin to see people as they are, not just as extensions of your own repressed pain. You become less reactive, more aware, more free. And in that space of awareness, transformation becomes possible. This is not the kind of self-help you'll find in mainstream advice. It's not about becoming better, it's about becoming whole. The shadow is not a flaw, it's a function. It's part of the psychological machinery that makes you who you are, and ignoring it doesn't make it disappear, it only makes it louder. So the question is, are you willing to look into the mirror and see everything? Not just the light, but the dark? Because the truth is, that's where your soul speaks, not in the polished version of you that pleases others, but in the wild, uncomfortable, honest depths of your shadow. And if you're brave enough to listen, you just might find the real you staring back. The shadow doesn't just appear one day out of nowhere. Its roots are deep, planted in childhood and nourished by every experience where you were told, "Don't be like that." As a child, you came into the world whole, full of instincts, emotions, desires, and a raw sense of self. But very quickly, you learned that some parts of you were acceptable and others were not. Your family, school, religion, and culture all played a role in shaping what you were allowed to express and what had to be hidden away. If you cried too much, you were told to toughen up. If you were too curious, you were labeled a troublemaker. If you showed too much ambition, you were called arrogant. Slowly, piece by piece, you began to disown parts of yourself, not because they were bad, but because they threatened your belonging. Jung called this process repression, and it's how the shadow is formed. Everything you reject from your conscious personality doesn't disappear. It slips into the unconscious and becomes part of the shadow. To survive socially, you put on a mask. Jung called it the persona, the version of yourself you present to the world. It's polite, likable, and socially acceptable. But it's not the whole truth. The persona is a performance, and the more rigidly you identify with it, the more disconnected you become from the rest of your psyche. Underneath the mask, the repressed shadow begins to stir, waiting for moments of weakness, stress, or crisis to break through. The conflict between the persona and the shadow creates internal tension. You feel like you're wearing a costume even when you're alone. You sense there's more to you than what you show, but you're afraid of what that more might be. You avoid the discomfort, distract yourself, numb out. But the pressure builds, because the shadow doesn't vanish just because you ignore it. In fact, repression makes it more dangerous. Unacknowledged anger becomes passive aggression. Denied envy turns into bitterness. Suppressed sadness mutates into emotional numbness. But Jung didn't believe this was a tragedy. He believed it was an opportunity. The existence of the shadow means that you are more than you think you are, that within you lies a reservoir of energy, creativity, and authenticity that has been buried, not destroyed. If you can turn toward it, if you can examine the roots of your shadow, you can begin to reclaim those lost parts of yourself. It starts with asking uncomfortable questions. What did I have to hide to be loved? What parts of me were never allowed to grow? What emotions have I been told are unacceptable? Shadow work begins with awareness, and awareness begins with honesty. Not just about your past, but about the mask you still wear today. Who are you trying to be, and who have you left behind in the process? This isn't easy work. It requires courage, humility, and the willingness to confront pain. but Jung believed it was essential for psychological growth. Without facing the shadow, you remain split, fragmented, hollow, disconnected from your full humanity. By tracing the shadow's origins, you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of punishment, fear of losing love. But those fears no longer serve you. The mask may have protected you once, but now it keeps you trapped. Shadow work is the act of peeling away the persona to find what lies beneath. Not just the darkness, but the brilliance. Not just the shame, but the truth. Your childhood wounds created the shadow, but your adult self has the power to integrate it. And when you do, you don't just become more whole, you become more real. You think you're in control. You make choices, form opinions, fall in love, get angry, and it all feels like it's coming from you. But what if it's not? What if much of what drives your actions, emotions, and reactions is not your conscious mind at all, but the unconscious? According to Carl Jung, the shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background, it acts, and it acts through you, often without your knowledge or consent. The shadow shows up in your life not as a ghost, but as projection. You see it in other people. You feel it in sudden bursts of rage, envy, fear, or obsession. That person you can't stand, that celebrity you irrationally hate, that political figure you demonize. There's a good chance they reflect a part of your own psyche you're unwilling to acknowledge. Jung called this shadow projection, and it's one of the most common and dangerous ways the shadow exerts control over you, but it doesn't end there. The shadow also drives your compulsions, that addiction you can't shake, that toxic pattern you keep repeating in relationships, that fear of failure or success. All of it could be rooted in unintegrated parts of yourself that you've banished to the unconscious. These parts are not gone, they're just hidden. And because they're unconscious, they don't speak in reason. They speak in sabotage, triggers, and emotional chaos. You might think you're choosing your life, but if the shadow remains unseen, it's choosing for you. Turmoil. You feel overwhelmed, stuck, or reactive, and you can't explain why. That's the shadow pulling the strings from behind the curtain. The more you ignore it, the more it erupts in your life, through anxiety, depression, inner conflict, or external chaos. You think the problem is out there, but Jung would say, the problem is within, demanding your attention. Consider how often people sabotage their own goals, quitting just before success, picking the wrong partners, procrastinating when it matters most. These aren't random flaws. They're symptoms of a deeper conflict between your conscious intentions and your unconscious beliefs. The shadow might believe you're unworthy of success, that you're not lovable, that you must stay small to be safe. And as long as those beliefs remain in the dark, they'll operate like hidden programs, steering your behavior in ways that defy logic. This is why Jung warned against over-identifying with the persona, the mask you wear in society. Because the more you cling to a curated image of yourself, I'm a good person, I'm always calm, I'm not like them, the more power your shadow gains. You start to split your psyche into light and dark, good and bad. And whatever doesn't fit the image gets pushed into the shadow, but you can't amputate parts of your soul without consequence. What you suppress doesn't die, it festers. Jung didn't view the shadow as evil. In fact, he believed that confronting the shadow was essential for growth. But here's the paradox. You can't control the shadow by trying to control it. You can't dominate it, fix it, or bury it deeper. You have to recognize it. You have to feel it. You have to be willing to look at the parts of yourself you're most afraid to see, not to judge them, but to understand them. Shadow work is the art of shining consciousness into darkness. It requires radical honesty about your fears, your judgments, your wounds, and your desires. And it requires compassion. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to make peace with the forgotten parts of yourself and bring them into alignment with who you are becoming. Once you begin this work, your triggers become teachers, your projections become mirrors, and your pain becomes a path, not to destruction, but to wholeness. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's the heart of shadow work. When you ignore the shadow, you are at its mercy. But when you face it, something extraordinary happens. You reclaim your energy. You stop being a prisoner of your own unconscious. You start to choose rather than react. You begin to live not just from the surface, but from your depths. That's when you become powerful, not because you've conquered your darkness, but because you've made peace with it. Most people will never do this work. They'll spend their lives running from their own reflection, blaming the world for their suffering, chasing illusions of perfection. But you are being invited into something deeper, a confrontation with truth, a transformation of the self. Not by becoming someone else, but by becoming whole. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your shadow because it's behind you. But if you dare to turn around, to face what you've denied, you'll find not just your darkness, but your strength, your authenticity, and your freedom. This is how the shadow controls you without you knowing. And this is how you begin to take your power back. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That sentence holds the key to real transformation, because contrary to popular belief, growth doesn't come from just visualizing your best self or chasing positivity. It begins the moment you stop running from what scares you inside. It begins when you turn toward your shadow and face it. This isn't a comfortable process. In fact, it's deeply unsettling. To face the shadow means confronting parts of yourself you've spent years denying: your envy, your rage, your fear of being weak or unloved, your secret cravings for power or control. It's seeing the ugliness and the vulnerability you've hidden not just from others, but from yourself. It's understanding that you're not just the hero of your story. You might also be the villain in someone else's. But Jung wasn't calling for shame or guilt. The shadow is not evil, it's simply unacknowledged. When you begin to observe your reactions with curiosity instead of judgment, you start creating space between the trigger and your response. That's the beginning of awareness. That's where consciousness starts to expand. You realize that you're not just your thoughts or impulses, you're the one who can witness them. And in that witnessing, there's power. Shadow work doesn't mean diving into darkness recklessly. It means building a relationship with the unconscious parts of yourself you've abandoned. It's a slow, intentional journey inward, an excavation of the soul. You begin by noticing your projections. Who triggers you? What qualities in others do you judge most harshly? These questions aren't about other people. They're a mirror reflecting what's inside you. Jung believed every criticism we hurl at the world might be a clue to what we've repressed within. Once you identify those projections, the next step is ownership. This is where transformation begins. You admit, that anger is mine, that envy is mine, that craving for recognition, that fear of rejection, that's all me. This doesn't mean you act on every dark impulse. It means you stop pretending those impulses don't exist, because only what is conscious can be transformed. What stays unconscious controls you. Jung also emphasized the importance of working with the shadow creatively. Through dreams, journaling, art, or dialogue, you can give your shadow a voice. Many people find their dreams filled with symbolic figures, monsters, strangers, or situations that evoke fear or shame. Jung saw these not as random fragments, but as messages from the unconscious. By interpreting these symbols, you begin to uncover the language of the shadow. It's not direct, but it's honest. Facing the shadow also requires patience. It's not a one-time event. It's a lifelong relationship. You'll uncover layer after layer, and each time you'll be faced with discomfort. But something else emerges too. Freedom. Real freedom. Because when you stop being afraid of your inner world, you stop being a prisoner of it. You become more grounded, more authentic. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop blaming and start owning. You integrate instead of divide. This is individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. And it always starts with the same brave step, facing the darkness and realizing it's part of your light. The true goal of shadow work is not just to see the darkness within you, but to integrate it. For Jung, integration meant wholeness. It meant taking all those splintered parts of yourself, the ones you've judged, feared, and buried, and welcoming them back into your consciousness, because only when you are whole can you be free. Only when you own all of who you are can you choose how to live, instead of being driven by unconscious forces. Integration is not about perfection. It's about authenticity. It's about owning the full spectrum of your humanity, the light and the dark, the kind and the cruel, the disciplined and the chaotic. It's understanding that you contain multitudes and that inner conflict doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're alive. The work is to hold all those opposing forces within you without being torn apart by them. To say, yes, I am capable of love, and I'm capable of hatred. I can be generous, and I can be selfish. I can shine, and I can sabotage. When you can hold those truths without flinching, without pretending, you've taken a powerful step toward inner mastery. Jung saw this process as deeply alchemical. Just as ancient alchemists sought to turn base metals into gold, the psyche transforms when the unconscious is brought into awareness. The shadow, once feared and rejected, becomes a source of strength. The energy that once went into repression and self-sabotage can now be reclaimed and redirected. Your rage becomes fuel for justice. Your envy becomes a signal of what you truly desire. Your fear becomes a teacher. But integration also requires boundaries. Embracing your darkness doesn't mean acting out every impulse. It means acknowledging it, understanding it, and then choosing consciously. The integrated person is not a slave to their emotions. They are the observer and the alchemist. They don't deny their shadow, but they also don't let it drive the car. They listen to it, learn from it, and then decide. This level of awareness creates psychological resilience. You're no longer shocked by your own reactions. You don't crumble when criticized because you've already met your inner critic. You don't panic when darkness arises because you've sat with it before. You start to respond instead of react. You become less fragmented and more grounded. People feel that in your presence. They may not know why, but they sense it. You're someone who's met themselves. And this integration ripples outward. When you've accepted your own flaws, you become more compassionate with others. You judge less, project less, and connect more. You stop needing to prove your worth because you know it. You stop being manipulated by shame or fear because you've already faced those monsters and survived. You begin to live with intention, clarity, and authenticity. That is the gift of shadow work. That is the beginning of real power. Once you've faced the darkness and integrated your shadow, you step into a new realm of personal freedom. This is not the superficial freedom of choice or circumstance. This is the deep, unshakable freedom that comes from truly knowing and accepting yourself, every part of yourself. The freedom that comes from no longer being at war with who you are. This is the freedom to be fully alive, to act from a place of self-awareness and authenticity, and to create a life that reflects the truth of your being. Jung's concept of individuation, becoming the person you are meant to be, is not a destination but a continuous journey. The more you integrate your shadow, the more you peel away the layers of illusion that hide your true self. You stop being ruled by the unconscious forces that once dictated your reactions, your fears, and your choices. Instead, you align with the deeper, truer parts of yourself. And in doing so, you start to live from a place of wholeness, where everything you do is a reflection of who you truly are. When you embrace your shadow, you no longer have to run from your imperfections or hide your vulnerabilities. The energy you once poured into suppressing or denying parts of yourself is now freed up for growth, creativity, and connection. You're no longer bound by self-doubt, shame, or fear of judgment. You realize that your flaws are not failures. They are simply parts of your humanity that make you whole. Your weaknesses become sources of strength because they teach you about your limitations, your desires, and your deepest values. Living a life of authentic freedom means making conscious choices that reflect your true self, even if they go against the grain of societal expectations. You stop pretending to be someone you're not. You stop playing small, whether in your career, relationships, or personal goals. You start to live in alignment with your inner truth, rather than trying to fit into roles or masks that others expect of you. The beauty of this freedom is that it doesn't come from conforming. It comes from being unapologetically yourself. Furthermore, embracing the shadow opens the door to deeper creativity. When you allow yourself to explore the full range of your emotions, desires, and experiences, you access an incredible wellspring of inspiration. Your creative expression no longer comes from a place of trying to prove something or cover up your insecurities. It comes from a place of wholeness, where your light and your dark are in harmony. Whether you're creating art, writing, or simply living your day-to-day life, you do so with a sense of ease, flow, and authenticity. In relationships too, embracing the shadow allows you to form deeper, more genuine connections. When you stop projecting your hidden parts onto others, you start seeing people for who they truly are. You stop expecting others to fulfill all your unmet needs or to be perfect. You recognize that everyone has their own shadow, and by acknowledging your own, you can meet others with compassion, understanding, and acceptance. These are the foundations for building authentic, meaningful relationships. But perhaps the most profound aspect of embracing the shadow is the sense of inner peace it brings. No longer at odds with yourself, you live in harmony with the complexities of your psyche. You've made peace with your past mistakes, your fears, and your flaws, and you understand that they don't define you. They are merely parts of a larger, more intricate picture. You can now walk through life with the confidence that no matter what challenges arise, you are whole, capable, and authentic. This kind of freedom is transformative. It's the freedom to live without fear, without shame, and without the need for approval. It's the freedom to pursue your passions, take risks, and follow your heart, because you know who you are and what you stand for. You are no longer bound by the need to hide or be someone you're not. You can show up in the world as the truest version of yourself, free from the grip of unconscious forces and fully alive to the richness of life itself. Living authentically is the ultimate form of self-love. It's the act of honoring who you are, even the parts that once scared you. It's the recognition that your shadow is not your enemy, but a vital part of your soul's journey. When you embrace both your light and your darkness, you unlock the door to a life of profound peace, freedom, and creative expression. And in that space, you can finally live the life you were always meant to lead, whole, authentic, and free.